continuing to talk about decentralized groups. We left off where I was discussing how you want to show your thinking, explain why you made the decision you made, ask people if they agree with that decision, even though it's kind of already been made or it was your call, and then follow up to see if that's working. So why would that create a decentralized group and or matter, right? And again, remember, a decentralized group is one where you're getting opinions and perspectives from everybody, right? But also those people feel like their opinions and perspectives are valued, right? So that not only are you doing that, but they know you're doing that, right? That you really care what their input is. So why would show your thinking, ask if they agree with the decision, and follow up matter? Well, this comes back to something with persuasion, okay? So there's like a hierarchy or levels to persuasion in terms of effectiveness, okay? And sometimes these are also referred to as like dynamics of change, because this can be applied also to your interpersonal life, to like when you persuade yourself, like such as goal setting and things like that. But here's basically, in a nutshell, how persuasion kind of works. So when somebody's persuaded, there's three ways that you can be persuaded to do anything, either persuade yourself or by somebody else, right? So the first one is having to do something. So you convince somebody to do something because they have to. I mean, this is the classic centralized group where the leader walks in the room and says, this is what we're doing. And you're like, okay, well, I guess we have to because they're the boss and they said so, right? So that's doing something because you have to. The reason that's the lowest level, it means it's the least effective form of persuasion. And the reason for that is because if you're doing something only because you have to, the minute you don't have to anymore, you'll stop doing it. Right? So the person says, you're doing this because I'm the boss and I said so. Well, the minute that they're no longer the boss, you're not going to keep doing it. You have no reason to, right? So that's the lowest level. Now, the second level, where people are more likely for the persuasion to stick, right, is what's called logical buy-in. So this is the scenario where you're doing something because you think it's the right thing to do. You intellectually agree with it, okay? So this would be an example of, you don't necessarily have to, okay, but you think it's right. So an example of this would be like, let's take recycling. I recycle. I think I should, so I do. But here's the deal. Like, if the planet's in trouble and recycling is going to lead to like just, the end of the earth, right? The apocalypse, right? The end times. By the time that happens, because of like the environment, global warming or something like that, right? Or just me not recycle. Let's say I didn't recycle, okay? Well, by the time the world implodes because of man-made environmental causes, I'm probably not going to be here anyway, right? So if we think about it just from an intellectual level, do I really have to recycle? Like, is it really going to affect me? Probably not, right? I think you could at least make that argument, right? That I would never see the consequences if I recycled or not in my lifetime. But I do because I think it's the right thing to do, right? So whenever you do something because you just agree with it, intellectually, that's logical buy-in. And that lasts longer than have to because, again, you do these things when you don't have to. Now, the highest level is what's called emotional buy-in. So emotional buy-in is I emotionally want to do it. And that, by the way, is the most effective form of persuasion. People will do things they emotionally want to do above anything else. They will do them even when they don't intellectually, even when they intellectually know it's not the right thing, or they might not agree with it, but they do it because they just want to, right? Emotion drives the bus. Okay, and in fact, there's some research that even suggests that we will do what we emotionally want to do, and then we Monday morning quarterback the logic. So in other words, afterwards, when we're trying to convince ourselves, no, that was the right thing to do, we try to come up, right, with these reasons why it was logically made sense, right? When in reality, it was just an emotional decision. And why is that? It's hard to tell. I think there's some kind of stigma. People just don't want to admit that they make emotional decisions, right? And if you think about it, and when I say stigma, is because it's almost like it's a bad thing. If you made the emotional decision instead of the logical, rational decision, that was somehow the wrong decision. Well, that's debatable. Depends on what we're talking about, right? For example, anytime you do something for your family, because they're your family, for the only reason is because they're your family, that's an emotional decision, right? Like, you didn't choose your family, most of them. Unless they're your spouse, you didn't choose these people. You're just born into the family, right? Why does your family why are they a cat and they get 9 lives? Why is that? Why do they get second chances? Because they're your family. You didn't choose them, right? You're doing that because emotionally you're like, a lot of times you feel a connection to them, right? You feel this sense of like, whether it's an emotional connection because you care about them or a moral connection, like you have this thing, like I was taught, like you care about your family, right? And you protect your family and family first. But that's a moral imperative, not necessarily a logical thing. Because again, it's not logical because there is no objective reason why your family members deserve a benefit of the doubt or second and third chances, right? Beyond some stranger, right? So those are emotional decisions. We don't apologize for those, right? When you choose who you're going to date, that's arguably a huge emotional decision, and who you get married to and all that sort of stuff. Like, think about it. You don't walk around running the analytics and you have a file folder and you're approaching guys or girls and saying, hey, you should date me. We should get together, right? We should date. Because I ran the analytics and the statistics say that if we get together and we have offspring, there's a 75% chance we won't get divorced because we're statistically compatible, and an 80% chance our children will be healthy, productive citizens. That's not what you do, right? You like who you like. You're attracted to who you're attracted to. Now, is there some logic and emotion in there? Sure there is, right? Like compatibility, or do we have things in common? It doesn't mean that logic doesn't play a role, but I think you could argue in who we choose to date, ultimately emotions is the primary role, right? Like in the end, it still comes down to being an emotional decision. So look, we make all kinds of emotional decisions all the time. It doesn't mean they're wrong. In other words, you will do things for your family and you don't make any apologies for that. And I'm not saying you should, right? Because again, I'm saying there's nothing wrong with sometimes making an emotional decision. I'm just saying own it, though. Know what you're doing, right? If that's what you're going to do. And maybe you shouldn't. Like, again, whether you should or shouldn't, that's a personal decision for you. But it's just like diagramming what's going on there. So we tend to do what we emotionally want to do and logically want to do beyond what we have to do. So me talking about this in persuasion, why does this matter, right? What does this have to do with decentralized groups? Well, here's where I'm going with this. Is that when people are committed to something, when you get buy-in, right? So even though they're not the leader, like they're just members of the group, and you want them to be happy at work because you want, which will create a good culture, right? That's sort of, it's this feedback loop onto itself. You create a good communicative climate that's positive, where people feel valued. They're happy at work. If they're happy at work, it continues, right? They tend to also then communicate in an open, friendly way, and right, it keeps feeding on itself. So if you want people to be happy and feel valued, where I'm going with this is you want to get logical and emotional buy-in. If you're the centralized leader and you say you're doing this because I'm the boss, because you have to, because I said so, there's no buy-in because you just said to do it because I'm the boss. You didn't even give them a reason to think it's the right thing to do or to emotionally buy in because you didn't give me a reason. In other words, you didn't show your thinking, right? So when you show your thinking, this is why I'm doing this. You're trying to give them typically it's just a logical reason, but a logical reason to agree with it. Like, yeah, that's the right thing to do. Or you're trying to give them that emotional reason, depending on the topic, right? But you're trying to get them persuaded to agree, to align with the decision at that level. Because that'll last longer. They will stick to it through adversity, right? They will stay committed to the mission even when they don't have to, even when you're not in the room, because they believe in it logically. They believe in it emotionally, right? And that's why you show your thinking. That's why you ask them if they're on board. Do you agree with this, right? Can you get on board? And try to get them to talk to you about it. Because if you do that, right, when you ask them if they're on board, you're kind of like testing the water, right? You're trying to gauge, did I get the logical and emotional buy-in? So you want to do that because it's just more effective persuasion. It just lasts longer. It's more ingrained in us, right? So that's why you want to take these steps. And then also like the whole follow up to see if it's working. The reason you want to do that is because it's sort of seeing, do I still have the logical and emotional buy-in, right? So the reason you're trying to be transparent, make people feel valued, and then explain your master plan, you don't, hide the blueprint. Explain everything to them so they can maybe agree with it intellectually and agree with it emotionally. Now, by the way, so there's these levels of persuasion, right? And I'm telling you, emotion's the strongest persuasion. Second is like logical buy-in, it's the right thing to do, or I intellectually just think it's logical and rational. And the lowest is have to. By the way, you can apply this to your own personal life when it comes to goal setting. Okay, like just whether or not you're going to follow through with something. So you might have seen this. This is the classic. This will be on a motivational poster or like the self-help kind of universe. You might have heard this phrase at some point. People will use the phrase, it's used in psychology sometimes, know your why. Have you ever heard that phrase? What the heck does know your why? And it's a person, again, just sitting there contemplating, it's a motivational poster, right, with a waterfall in the background. Know your why as they meditate. They're like, what the heck does that mean? It's referring to this. So when you set a goal, when you want to do something, in other words, you're making a promise to yourself, you're trying to persuade yourself, you need to persuade yourself at the level of logical and emotional buy-in. In other words, know your why means you need to not just know what you want to do, you need to know why you want to do it intellectually. Why is it the right thing for you? Right? Why is it rational to want this? Why is it logical? Why do you need to do this? Not just have to do this, need to do this. And then emotional buy-in is emotionally, what's your reason? So it's like, take a goal that people typically have. They want to lose weight. Well, I need to lose weight. That's typically what they do. New Year's comes around, they set the goal, they're like, well, I got to lose weight. Okay, you're statistically not likely to lose weight. If that was I just need to. Why do you need to logically? Come up with the reasons. Think about it. They could be as simple as, I'll live longer. I don't want to die. Right? That could be the logical reason. I'll be happier because I'll just be physically healthier. I'll feel better. I won't be in pain. Right? I won't be just physically uncomfortable. Right? Psychologically, like research into how food can affect mood and depression or things like that, right? Anxiety. So I'll mentally feel better. These are like kind of like the logical, but come up with those reasons, emotional reasons. Well, I want to be there for my family, the people I care about. I just be happier living longer, like all those sorts of things. You got to come up with those. Okay. And here's why. Because when adversity hits, and it will, any goal you set, life is not all, it's amazing how many people just quit, right? They set a goal and it's like they expected everything to be green lights. And unfortunately, life is not all green lights for most of us. Okay, you're going to hit adversity. You're going to hit a red light. And it's funny how people, when they hit adversity, they just quit. They're like, it's like if you were driving to campus or your job or something, and the minute you hit a red light, you're just like, screw it. And you just like abandon your car. But like, that's what people do with their goals. Now, why does that happen? It happens because a lot of times they only persuaded themselves that I have to. They never really came up with a reason why they wanted to. It was just, this is just what I want. They never really came up with why, right? Beyond I have to. You want to lose weight? Why? You want a lot of money? Why? You want to date this person? Why? You want that career? Why? What's it gonna give you? Why is it the right thing for you intellectually? Why is it the right thing for you emotionally? Because here's the deal. When you face adversity, right? Like this goes back to the famous Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson has a quote where he said, everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face. Meaning, it's all, you can game it out ahead of time, but the minute you face adversity, what do you do in that moment, right? When it's easy to quit. Well, here's the thing. When you don't know your why, when you don't have intellectual and emotional buy-in, that's your chance to quit. Because you can't. Because you'll come up with a reason why you don't have to. Like in the diet scenario, it's like, well, I can just start next month or tomorrow or Monday. Right? And it lets you quit. Instead of when you hit adversity, the logical and emotional buy-in will keep you going. And so that's why you want to know your why. So you can apply this to your personal life too. Look, there's lots of research on goal setting. There's other dynamics. So for example, you're statistically more likely to accomplish goals you set if you're specific. So go back to the weight loss. Like the first person says, I want to lose weight. Next person says, I want to lose 60 pounds this year. Third person says I want to lose 5 pounds a month. By the way, in order, the person most likely to accomplish that goal is I'm going to lose 5 pounds a month. Second most likely is 60 pounds a year. The one who's most likely to fail is the one who just said I'm going to lose weight this year. Right. And obviously, if we add the know your why, anybody who throws in they figured out an emotional reason, a logical reason, they are also way more likely to accomplish the goal. But an example would be like research goal saying you have to be specific. So why does being specific matter? Because if you're not specific, if you're not detailed, it gives you excuses to quit, to like lie to yourself that you're still accomplishing the goal. Like think about the first person who said, I want to lose weight this year. That person could gain 15 pounds in January. And they have not failed their goal. Because it's a bad start, but after all, they did say they were going to lose weight this year, right? And so they can catch up, just a bad start. But the other two people have already failed. They can't do that, right? The second person, well, actually, no, the second person hasn't failed, but they're in more trouble because they specifically said 60 pounds. Now they got to lose 75, right? That first person really has to lose 20, right? They just make up the 15 and 5 more, right? Now the third person, they've already failed. So you know what that means? You know what that means? It means they can't just screw around in January, right? Because they said 5 pounds a month. So on February 1st, it's going to be determined if they kept that promise or not, right? So when you are specific, it holds you accountable. It doesn't give you cop-outs and cheats and excuses that you can make when you're really giving up, but tell yourself you're not giving up because after all, you weren't detailed, right? And so you want to be specific, right, about goals. And you also want to know your why. Again, there's other things with goal setting. We're not going to go, maybe I went too long on that, but I just wanted to point out that you can apply this to your own life too, like why this matters. So the reason you want to engage in those steps with creating decentralized groups, specifically on show your thinking, ask them if they agree with it, and follow up to see, do you still agree with it, is because you're trying to gauge the temperature of the water. Am I getting that intellectual and emotional buy-in? Because that's the most powerful form of persuasion. Other barriers that generally happen, just things to consider in a group, is like if there's not a good culture or the communicative climate's not well, beyond like just seeing like how are people communicating verbally and non-verbally, you could ask yourself a couple of things. Are there conflicts of interest? Like do people in the groups or do people on the team just have competing interests that's creating a problem, right? Is there a stress situation? It's like work overload that's creating a problem. Just you can ask yourself about these other practical things. Poor leadership. Like, are you not doing a good job of taking control of setting that culture and setting that tone, right? Do you need to do more actively? Okay. And specifically, do you need to do more in terms of like instituting using more effective communication strategies? So just some broad things to keep in mind. What are the characteristics of really good leaders in groups? Generally, they focus on improving two things, which is productivity and consideration for people, right? So it's sort of like I care about your work output, but I also care about you. So in terms of improving productivity, generally, and again, I'm really condensing some of this down, but generally what you want to do is establish standards and accountability. So if you want people to be productive, let them know what the goal is, right? And what's meeting that goal effectively and what's not, right? Encourage individual and team goals. So don't just encourage the success of the group. Encourage them as an individual, like, and talk to them, right, about what are the things that they want to get out of a situation, and encourage those goals as well, so they stay personally motivated, not just motivated for the group. Improving consideration. This is again just making people feel valued. Obviously, that does come down to just in general treating people well and setting a good communicative climate, but compensating well, right? You may have heard the classic quote, if you're going to pay me minimum wage, you're going to get a minimum wage effort, right? Kind of thing. And you do got to think about that, right? When you don't pay people well or compensate them well for what they're doing, they don't feel valued, and that can definitely come back to bite you. So compensate people well if you have some control over that. Be personable with people, right? Like show a genuine interest, at least in respecting them as a person and caring about them. Encourage that open communication dialogue. Again, that's the communication climate. And recognize people's accomplishments. When people do well or they do things you appreciate, let them know that, right? Let them know that they're valued and considered. It sounds corny, but a lot of people can feel like they're not appreciated when they really are, right? And that can definitely happen. So it's important that you say those things, acknowledge people, not just like for little things, but obviously big things, right? Like recognize the things that if we're talking about a workplace scenario, recognize the great things that they do for you and your company or the group. And then the lowest level of social ecology is the sort of individual interpersonal level. So again, the whole point of this discussion that we've been going through here on social ecology is to talk about, okay, what are the common groups, aka cultures, right, that people engage in? So we talked about the broader cultural level. That could be things like nationalities. We talked about things at the broader dominant American culture, right? So then we talked about that. People then belong to organizations, so we talked about that. And now we're talking about more of an individual level and interpersonal level. So in terms of individual, at an individual level, so this is just like you. And it's almost like if you view yourself as your own little culture, this is kind of like your own identity and your own, just personally who you think you are and what you value. So that is what comprises that. What's its core, right? What's its deep structure, as we talked about earlier, tends to be our beliefs, our values of what's right and wrong, our general norms or patterns of behavior, and our perspectives on things, right? And so it's all of those sorts of things that kind of make up kind of the core of who you are. Now, we're not going to talk much about that. What I will say about this is just, and we're going to get to this in a second, but what could influence that is really like just what do you expose yourself to? Like, what is the information that you expose yourself to that can affect your beliefs, your values, and your perspectives in a good or bad way? And obviously, paying attention to if it's affecting it in a bad way, then maybe that's not the type of information or content you want to be around, or just things you want to expose yourself to, whether it's information, content, other people, that kind of stuff. But it's almost like looking, in terms of social ecology, they're kind of like looking at this as like you're almost your own little culture, like just your individual identity. Now, interpersonal is just dealing with your individual relationships with people, right? So with specific other people, like one person. So, and we tend to seek out relationships with people that we tend to be oriented towards conformity of attitudes and values. So in other words, we like people like us, right? So we tend to want to associate with people that are similar to us in terms of our beliefs and our core values. Now, there's some divergence there. Like sometimes, for example, opposites attract, or like sometimes a shy person might like hanging around with a more outgoing person because they bring that out to them and bring that side out of them. Or somebody who's maybe more reserved and measured with things versus somebody who's more spontaneous, right? So to where it's a good balance, or they kind of help each other. So I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I'm saying for the most part, at a core, we will look for people that have the same conformity, attitudes, and values as we do, that are similar to us. Or that, okay, maybe we have these different personality traits, but at its core, we have certain like really important beliefs or values or attitudes that are similar. And in fact, there's some interesting studies on this. There's actually research where you can take two friends and you separate them and you ask them about something that's important to them, like topic one. And you ask one friend, okay, they're best friends. You ask the first person, what does your friend think of topic one? And the person will say, well, they think A. That's what they think about topic one. Then they go ask the friend, and what do you think about topic one? And they're like, well, I think A asterisk, A, B minus, right? They think something slightly different. Okay, so what do you think? What do you think this friend thinks? Well, they think B minus, right? So in other words, you separate people and you ask them, what does your friends think? What do your friends or family think? And they are more likely to say that the friend or the family thinks the way they do, even if it's not true. So in other words, not only do we like people like us, and we tend to want to be around people like us in terms of attitudes and values, we will oftentimes in our own head try to twist the people we hang around with as having similar attitudes, more similar attitudes and values to us than they really do. Right? It doesn't happen all the time. I'm just saying there's research that shows that happens, which kind of shows the power of this, right? All right. So two things I kind of wanted to wrap up here with. So a couple of things. So going back to that, the individual thing, which is if you view yourself as a little culture, like your own identity and like what's going on in your head, right? How you feel about yourself and what you're thinking of the world, your attitudes, your values, your beliefs. This goes back to this quote's been kind of used, or this phrase has been used in a lot of different contexts, but choose your influences and your friends wisely. Or you'll hear people say, choose your friends wisely. Okay. It's also been said, this phrase of like, who you hang out with is who you become. And here's what I mean by that, or here's what people mean by that typically when they say that, is the information you expose yourself to can be positive or negative in terms of its influence on your beliefs, your perspectives, your attitudes, and values. And what I'm saying is you have to regulate, you have to ask yourself, is this healthy for me to be exposed to? Like the classic example that you probably have experience with is there's all kinds of research that shows the more engaged people are with social media, the more depressed they become. Not rocket science why that happens. Because again, you get on social media, it's everybody's PR firm, so they're only showing their best life. Real or imagined, you're getting this this impression of everything's awesome with them. And you're trying to compare your life to that, and you're just not going to measure up. Because you know your real life. You know the good and the bad, and they're only showing you the good. You're always going to fall short. So people get depressed. Right? And it's everything from what their life is to beauty standards, and where, again, when you look at social media, or just media in general, so much of that can be faked. It's not real. Right? Even like beauty standards, like how much of these images do we see are just photoshopped, right? They're not real. It's not quite what they look like, or it's just, or it's all these, sort of, it's all of this other manipulation, right? Of to give you a certain impression, and so people feel bad, right? And that's, or obviously, another example would be getting on social media and people just being awful and terrible to each other, and that goes to things like cyberbullying or just people just being horrible human beings online. Why does that happen? It happens because it's easy to be a tough guy behind a keyboard, right? So people are vicious online because there's no accountability. But when you get on there, that can be like really unhealthy, right? To expose yourself to that. And so what I'm saying is, ask yourself, am I exposing myself to things that aren't healthy for me? Right? That's making me feel bad. That's affecting my mindset in a negative way. And, you could walk away. I'm not saying you have to like totally get off social media. Like those are the examples I gave. But what I'm saying is you can limit what you're exposed to, And so whether this is, the social media you engage in, the shows you watch, the podcasts you listen to, just ask yourself, is this healthy and productive for me? Right? And I'm not saying everything has to be maximized productivity all the time, right? It's okay to, you like a show, it's just kind of like a harmless pleasure and you veg out to it. That's fine, right? That's serving a healthy benefit, actually, because it's serving relaxation and lets you kind of unwind and decompress. But what I'm just saying is pay attention to that. And the same thing goes with your friends, right? So choose your friends, right? So I gave that phrase a few minutes ago, who you hang out with is who you become. So the belief on that is that what happens is if you have certain expectations in life, if the people you tend to associate with, whether it's like your friends in person or these other outlets, again, that you're just exposing yourself to, here's what happens, particularly with friends, is, look, we like our friends. And what happens is when they have a different standard in life of what they're looking for or expectation, they have their reasons. Like, let's say there's a particular thing in life, like career aspiration, let's just say. And yours is an 8. You're really aspirational. Like you want to be at the top of your field, or you have all these big hopes and dreams in terms of a career. And your friend, it's like a 4, right? They don't have a lot of initiative. That's just not a thing for them. Well, you like your friend, and they have their reasons why they want a 4, right? They have their reasons. Well, guess what? There's a real danger if you're not actively trying to like be careful about who you let influence your identity and your perspective and your beliefs and values about the world. Here's what happens. Eventually, if your friend who you like, right, if whatever excuses or reasons they have for wanting a 4 in terms of like their career aspirations, if those excuses or reasons are good enough for them, guess what? Eventually they become good enough for you too. Right? If you're not actively taking control of this, and then guess what? You start to want a 4. You settle for a 4. And you can apply this to anything in life. If everybody else around you is cool with a 4 starts to look pretty good. And you have a tendency to no longer chase the 8 or your potential or what would really make you happy. So you got to be careful. Now, look, I'm not saying that you can't have friends. You can't be friends with people from different walks of life and different expectations and different standards. That's perfectly fine. But what I'm saying is you have to make a choice to actively say to yourself, I am not going to let other people's expectations or viewpoints, they may inform me, I may take it under consideration, but I'm not going to let it direct me. I'm not going to let it decide, be the final influencer of what I'm capable of or what I want in life, right? And where I'm going with this is a lot of people don't take that step to actively say that, right? And instead, it just eventually keeps bleeding in. And the next thing you know, right, you are believing all the things that the world around you is telling you is true about life or about you, and no longer believing what you know is true about your life and you, right? So that's why you have to choose your friends wisely. That's why you have to choose what you're exposing yourself to, right? And because you don't want it to lead you in a negative direction, right? So at the individual level, and this also, of course, applies to the interpersonal level. So just ask yourself these things, think about these things when you're thinking about um, how to move forward in a healthy way at the individual level in terms of your beliefs and viewpoints, as well as in relationships with people, right? It's like, I'm going to be around people that are healthy for me, right? That when I say healthy, I guess the better word would be have a positive influence or effect on me, right? Have the influence that I want, right? So just kind of some final food for thought. So that was our discussion on social ecology. Again, this is really just studying, okay, if cultures are basically just, which we've talked about before, cultures are just groups, right? This is basically just the list, what are the types of groups, the categories of groups that people tend to belong to. All right, I will see you guys hopefully in our next discussion.